In the previous episode of Build, we talked about why if somebody doesn't understand your explanation for a technical concept, it's not okay to just tell them to look it up or Google it. And if you missed that episode and the reasons why it's important for you to explain, then I've included a link to it below. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the specific tactics for how you can explain abstract technical concepts to an audience of either lay people or one that may be a little bit more advanced. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode, innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. Now, we've been talking about the importance of breaking down abstract technical concepts as the person explaining them. And in the last episode, we uncovered why it's important as the explainer to take the time to explain things in a way that your audience is going to understand. And in today's episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper to give you specific tactics that you can use the next time you're presented with having to communicate something to a teammate or to a lay audience. And to help us out, Janzer is back. She is the author of a number of books that range on topics from writing to marketing, and she's kind of a cognitive science geek. So thanks again for joining us today, Anne.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So I know in your upcoming book, you've got a range of techniques, and I want to kind of tease out just a few for our audience. And I know it focuses on writing, but I'm sure a lot of these techniques apply in a number of contexts. Maybe you can share with our audience some of the contexts that you think these techniques could apply to.
Really, yes. I think they apply anytime you've got to communicate about a complicated topic to someone who doesn't share the same background you have on that topic. So it can be whether you're writing an email to somebody or presenting to investors, maybe trying to explain to your family what the heck it is you do for a living. Yeah. That's always, that can be a challenge if you work in tech, right. I know. There's all sorts of things. And it certainly applies to, most of this applies to writing as well as speaking. The challenge with writing that's a little different than speaking is that when we're speaking, I have my body language, I have my voice, and I can see if you're like checking your mail or confused or any of that. It's very obvious. And when I'm writing, the reader's not present while I write, and the writer's not present while they read, so everything's just on the paper. So you have to work harder to really advocate for the reader as you are doing the work of planning and writing and revising so that it really, you can be almost present with them.
So let's talk about the things that we need to take extra time to explain.
Right. So, here's the main thing. It's abstract topics. Mm-hmm. Technology is itself just layers of abstraction, right? And, you work in this silo of abstraction and that person works in that silo of abstraction. Maybe I know storage and cloud infrastructure, right? They're really related things, but they're different things. And when people are faced with abstract ideas, this is a part of human reasoning. We are animals that abstract things. Mm-hmm. There's a couch and there's a table and they're both furniture. Now, everybody's comfortable. If I talked about furniture, you know what I'm talking about. But when it gets to technology, you can get to the point where people aren't comfortable with that. And so what we need to do is try to figure out a way how to take something that is abstract and sometimes intangible, it's just an idea, and make it concrete so that people can understand it.
Now, what are the specific things that we need to take extra time to explaining?
So, when we work in the tech industry, we're dealing with abstract ideas all the time, abstractions, and it's just, layers and layers and layers of abstractions. And so we come up with a lot of words and terms and jargon that is shorthand. And it's absolutely essential for us to communicate with each other, right? But it's not always essential for us to communicate with someone outside of our field. Mm-hmm. And that is often the biggest barrier for people understanding what we're talking about when we're talking about technology is the words that we use, the jargon and the abstractions that we use. So that is the thing that the very low-hanging fruit to take care of when you're writing or speaking is what abstractions and what jargon am I using that could cause problems?
Yeah. I've also noticed for a lot of my students and audience is they may have something that's internal to their company. So yeah, sure, something like HTML. Okay, we get that that's an abstraction because of the acronym. It's kind of buzzwordy. But then they have something internal where they say, oh, we use this thing called an OKR. And they just assume everybody in their company knows it. But somebody on the outside's like, OKR? What is that, right?
Right.
Yeah, so how can we kind of figure out what things we may think are specific to our organization or even our team are not necessarily commonplace?
Yeah, so you have to get a little distance. You have to, I like to print out what I've written and maybe, highlight anything that is a term, an abstraction, maybe anything that is abbreviated, capitalized, acronyms,
Yeah.
what they are, right? And for each of them, you need to ask two questions. Is it possibly unfamiliar to my audience? And is it necessary? So if it's necessary to use it, the only way to talk about it, or everybody talks about, blockchain is blockchain, right? Okay, there, I had to use the word blockchain.
Sure.
There's a law, right?
Yeah.
Has to use it. If it's necessary to use it, but it might be unfamiliar, then it is on you to define it or show an example the first time you use it, or use it in such a clear context that there's no confusion. If it's unnecessary and unfamiliar, if there's another way to use it, get rid of it. You're just adding unnecessary cognitive load to the reader. So necessary or unnecessary, familiar or unfamiliar. I mean, you don't have to strip out furniture. You don't have to strip out acronyms or things that people really should all know who are in your audience. But you do need to be anything that, maybe they know it, but maybe they haven't encountered it that many times.
Right.
So they're going to have to do a little bit of extra work to fill in the blanks while they're listening to you or reading.
So is there a way we can gauge the audience level? Because I know a lot of times people assume, well, I'm talking about this new framework, this new technology, and it's in the title of my talk. This conference is about this talk. So I just assume everyone coming here is going to know what this is. Why do I really need to take an extra 30 seconds, 1 minute, PowerPoint slide, etc. to explain this? Won't it seem like I'm dumbing it down for them?
Yeah, right. And, I think you don't want to dumb down for people. You want to respect their intelligence, but you also have to remember, someone at the conference just came out of 3 other sessions. Someone picking up your article may be like, wait, why do I want to read this? It's in the title. I forgot. People come from a very interrupt-driven, context-changing day, and you need to help them reset, even if you think that everybody coming is showing up for that reason. They may not be. They may be showing up for other reasons as well. So it's always worth trying to put yourself in the audience shoes for a moment and say, well, let's say I'm new to this industry and I'm showing up here to learn. What should I assume the people, what that person might know? What if you were on your second week in your job and you show up at your talk or you pick up your article? You want to help that person as well as the next one, right? You want to help your audience. You should be doing this to try to be understood, and you would like to be understood by them.
Yeah. Or that person that got dragged to the talk because, hey, your buddy was like, this is going to be an amazing talk. I know this speaker, but you're like, what? I don't know what this thing is.
Yeah. And if all goes well, you'll be one of the speakers that people go to hear your talk, even if they don't know what your subject is about, because you're so awesome as a speaker. So
how do we know who's going to show up, or how can we gauge the audience level before we write our post, our book, or give our talk?
I think, we have to try to put ourselves in the seat of the audience or in the mind of the audience, try to figure out who the people might be and answer these 3 questions about them. What do they already know? Where are they coming from? And give them a little range. Don't assume everybody is at the top of the knowledge range there. So what do they already know? How do they feel about the topic? Are they there, under duress? Are they there because they're really fascinated by it, because they think it's a hot investment opportunity? I mean, there's a lot of different things that could be motivating people to learn about your topic. And it's interesting to know what they are. And what makes them curious? How can you engage their curiosity and bring them in to learn more about what you're trying to explain? Because when someone's curious, they're going to be paying more attention. They're going to be coming with you as you explain your thing with them. Yeah. So you have to give them a reason to be paying attention.
Sometimes we're in a mixed audience, though, where our teammates are there, some stakeholders, it's internal, or we're in an external, conference or an event where there's people of varying levels, we don't necessarily want to bore the people who already know what we're saying, and we also don't want to talk down to the people who are beginners. So how can we explain in a way that is inclusive?
Yes, that's a challenge. And it's something that you're going to have to play with and balance. But I think it's important to remember that nobody gets upset if you quickly define a term the first time you use it. And you can also use to guide people who are different ranges by using an interesting example, so that people already know it, find value from the example. People who don't know it learn to hear what you're saying. So if you're talking about artificial intelligence and recommendation algorithms, right? Most of your audience may know what that means, but a few may be just like, and then so you can say, like when Netflix recommends what, or the other day I went on Netflix and I got a recommendation to check out this story. Now you've anchored it in something that is an experience that everybody has. You've level set the people who weren't so familiar with that term. You've brought them right back up, and you haven't really bored the people who do know what it is. Yep. It doesn't take a heavy lecture touch to do this. You can do it through an example, through a story.
So I think that brings us to the first tactic. Let's dive right in.
Great. So one of the first ways to explain technical concepts is something that you probably do instinctively all the time, which is to use an analogy. In fact, tech is just filled with metaphors and analogies. We have, like I said, we have files and folders, and which there's no real folders in your computer, right?
Right?
There is no little folder. It's an icon, but it's an analogy that we're working with. So metaphors, analogies, they can serve two things, actually. One is they can help explain what's happening or give us a useful way to engage with stuff that is amorphous. And two, they can actually connect on a different level. So I found this metaphor the other day about, or analogy about using Unix is kind of like driving a stick shift car, right? So it gives you more power, more control, but, learning it can be kind of uncomfortable and it takes a little while, right? So now if you've ever driven a stick shift car,
I have,
okay, you have,
the clutch.
And you've burned the clutch, right? So when I used that analogy, we had a shared experience, and you're like, okay, that makes sense to Unix, right? That's an interesting.
Right.
But you also, the part of you that's listening to it probably, I did this thing with my hand, right? I mean, I have a physical memory of driving a stick shift. I have a physical memory of learning and the rabbit, the jumping thing that you do when you're like or burning a clutch. So if you were listening to me, or if you were reading those words even, the little parts of your brain that are involved with the physical memories or the visual memories of seeing something, those parts of your brain fire. Metaphor actually connects on a way beyond our reasoning, thinking mind. People in functional MRIs, they show if they read a story, the action parts of their brain are actually firing as if they were doing the thing that they're reading about. So our brains are not really, we know rationally what's metaphor, but we also sort of connect on a different level. Now, if that happened while you're talking about Unix, that's a win, right? You're now more engaged. It's a little bit more interesting to you, right? You've gotten the meaning, but you've also just become a little bit more interested in sticking with the experience of reading or listening.
Right. But I've also seen that backfire sometimes, where you pick a metaphor or you pick an example that you think the audience is going to get. Let's just call a spade and say there's a lot of sports analogies out there that get used. Yep. And the person on the receiving end's like, I don't know the first thing about baseball.
Yeah, or it's like, oh, that's like that 11th inning. It's like, no.
Or do you mean cricket?
Yeah. Exactly.
So how do we know that our example or our metaphor that we choose is going to be universal? Yeah. How can we kind of test it out?
Yeah, testing it is exactly the thing. I mean, the analogies work if there's a shared experience. Now, sometimes you can have an analogy that isn't a shared experience. I think about Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan, where he used the black swan, the story of the black swan, as an analogy for an unanticipated risk, a risk that something we assumed we didn't exist because we didn't see it, right? That has to be explained. So sometimes analogy is great, but it needs to be explained. But most of the time we want our metaphors to teach and not to need a lot of teaching.
Sure.
So we need to understand the audience. We need to be empathetic and understand where they're coming from, and give a little explanation if we suspect there are cultural differences. And be aware too that metaphors, because they activate those other parts of our brain. If you use a metaphor of a clown and your audience is people who have like that clown phobia thing,
That's true.
you know what I mean?
Might activate the wrong.
You can activate the wrong things. Metaphors are powerful and they can, go in unexpected directions. So be careful, especially across cultural. Working in tech is so multicultural. We need to be quite cautious with the metaphors that we use.
All right. And what about the second tactic?
The second tactic is, again, we're trying to do is make something that's abstract more real to the reader, to the listener. And one of the best ways to do that is through story. Now, I was an English major in college, and when I was a freshman year, couple of my friends took a creative writing class. They were also English majors, and I saw them terrified before every time they had to turn in a story. They pull in all-nighters, and I said to myself, oh my God, storytelling is scary, it's stressful, and it makes you stay up all night. I am not doing any of that. Forget it. I'm running, I'm a nonfiction writer. I'll be a literature major and I'll go into technical writing because there's no story involved. Well, so, years later, of course, I was wrong. They're the best, writers. When I read these books, I tell you the writers that I admire who write about cognitive science, they use story incredibly effectively. They are not fiction writers. Story doesn't mean fiction. So using story is a great way to connect with people, and it's something that we all need to do. Like I just shared with you a story about my personal transformation about story. It's not that hard. I'm not a master storyteller. I didn't follow a 3-act structure. I didn't have rising and declining. You can do all that.
Right.
But a story can be very simple. It could be a moment of time when you realize something. It could be, a certain situation. And the best advice, for me, I had to shed my preconceptions about storytelling and just try something very simple and just experiment with it a bit and gradually get a little bit more confidence as to how to use it.
I've noticed that, especially with folks who are very technical, that I do a lot of public speaking coaching with, they have an aversion to starting with a story because their preconceived notion is, it's going to be long-winded, the audience is going to tune out, pull out their laptop, cell phone, whatever. And is this really necessary? Why can't I just cut to the chase and say, today I'm going to talk about a distributed denial of service attack, right? And you kind of cut to the chase. People get it, but it's so much more compelling if you were to say, 6 months ago, we were under attack. We were facing a distributed denial of service attack.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the audience is like, what's that? That sounds terrible, right? And it's just a very simple switch.
Yeah.
Like you said, it doesn't have to be long-winded. So how can we help our audience understand that when you're presenting a story, it doesn't have to be a tome. It doesn't have to be 400 pages. It can be pithy.
Right. I mean, there are stories all around you. Anytime you take an abstract technology and you look at a human interaction with it, there's a potential for a story.
A use case.
A use case is a story.
Yeah.
And actually, it's more interesting the more, not a 10-page use case. God, no. Just a little short blip of, this person using this to do this. It can be a story. It doesn't have to be it shouldn't be a long thing. And don't give someone a story when they're asking for data.
Mm-hmm.
That drives me nuts. It's like you go up and say, what happened to sales last year? Let me tell you a story. Oh God, don't do that.
Yeah.
Story has its role.
Right.
It's not something that you should be overwhelming people with, but it's a really powerful tool for either engaging their interest, engaging their curiosity, or explaining something because they come along with you as they understand it.
Yeah. So you could say something like, the conversion rate went up 75% or went down 75%. If you want to know more, happy to give you the details.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Nice. So in the previous episode, we touched upon this desire to be long-winded, and you mentioned how people often do it because they want to come off as being credible. They worry, oh my gosh, if I take my 500-word bio and cut it down to 100, someone will miss something. They won't know that I wrote 200 books or that I met with the Dalai Lama, and that's really important for me being able to speak on Bitcoin, right? So how can we help our audience realize that it's okay to be brief and it's not going to cost us our credibility?
Right. Yeah, it's not going to cost you your credibility, and in fact, it's probably going to increase your credibility. People, again, your credibility is based on being understood. And when we include too much, people perceive it that we're busy talking about us and our needs and not focusing on the reader's needs. So if you are talking about Bitcoin and you're an expert on Bitcoin, then just craft a bio about Bitcoin. I mean, people can link and find out more about you if they are so interested. Get them curious about you to find out more. That's awesome. But don't, throw out everything at them in the bio. And, put some of that stuff in your bio as opposed to in the body of your talk. You don't have to be, first, let me tell you about my 5, startups or something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people can look this up. You want to get them curious enough to look up the stuff rather than you feeding it to them. Because if you think about everybody, we have so much stuff. I think that we're all reading less and less online. So if you show up with 50 really great words, people will read them. If they see a block of 300 words, they're going to skip the whole thing.
Yeah.
If you want to be effective, be brief, be concise, and give the reader what they're looking for rather than what you feel you need to be saying.
Yeah. So it's all about that topicality. What is it that the crux of the subject is, and how does your bio, your credibility fit into that?
Absolutely. And you will be credible if you show up and give them useful stuff. That's going to be important.
Yeah. So what's the final tactic?
So the final tactic is to think about the tone and style that you're writing in or speaking in. Now, tone is kind of like brand. It's not something that you assert. It's something other people interpret, right?
Right.
So, right?
Yeah, that makes it really hard.
It makes it hard. It makes it hard. That's why you actually have to get out and test your stuff. You have to test your writing. You have to test your speaking. But you may think that you're showing up one way and people may be interpreting it another. In speaking, we've got things to do, and you are expert in that, to show up with a different tone, a different persona. In writing, all you got is your words. And so there's some levers that you can use in looking at, we've talked about them already, abstractions, the jargon. That has a huge impact on the tone of the written piece. So going through and stripping out unnecessary abstraction, stripping out unnecessary words actually makes the piece stronger. Sometimes when we add words like very and really, it weakens our prose, which is crazy. So,
Qualifier words.
Qualifier words, just like go through and cut them out in revision. Make your thing stronger by being more to the point and quick. The sentence length, sentences don't have to go on for pages and pages, short sentences. Not the way we speak, because obviously I ramble on when I speak, but when I write, my sentences are short and to the point.
Well, these are all great tactics. Now, I know it's going to be a challenge and it's going to take some work, some iterations. The first time we try some of these tactics, we may fall flat. So how can we go about iterating?
So, you're going to need to find your personal balance for what feels comfortable for you, works with the subject, and meets the audience needs. And that balance may change with everything you do. Every talk you give, every blog post you write may be a little bit different. Well, hopefully not every blog post. But, you're going to find your personal style and tone, and you're going to have to test things out. And the other thing, to remember, even while we talk about brevity, is repetition, that people don't necessarily catch things the first time it goes past. In fact, they rarely catch things the first time it goes past. So if you can find a way to iterate within your talk or iterate within your article by repeating your message in a slightly different way, with a different example, eventually it's going to sink in and have an effect. So you may hit these readers with this thing, and these readers with a second occurrence, and these readers with a third occurrence when it's expressed in a slightly different way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anne. This has been really helpful. I know our audience out there is going to get a lot of value and will hopefully start to employ these tactics as they have to communicate those difficult technical concepts, whether it's inside their organization or outside.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. So how can our audience get in touch with you?
So my website is my name, Anne with a silent E, Janzer. And you can find information there about the book, Understood, which is on Amazon and hopefully all the other places that you would buy books. We'll see. And also I have a regular blog about writing. You can sign up for that there. And I'd be happy if anyone had any questions, wanted to reach out to me. I'd be happy to hear from them.
Wonderful. Well, we'll be sure to include the links below the video and in the show notes.
Great. Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode of Build. Be sure to share this episode with your friends, your teammates, and your boss. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more episodes of Build. Ciao for now. This episode of Build is brought to you by our main sponsor, Pivotal Tracker. We'd also like to thank our Platinum Patreon patrons, Corky Bites, The Developer Show, and Jamie Hand. Finally, thanks to the following new patrons. If you've enjoyed watching Build, please consider becoming a patron and contributing on Patreon at www.patreon.com/build. You can pledge $5 a month or more, and your pledges will go towards helping us produce and promote the show. In exchange, you'll receive perks like being mentioned in the credits, digital copies of our latest book, and Platinum patrons will receive exclusive perks like monthly online group coaching, where I provide more hands-on coaching on a number of topics related to entrepreneurship and leadership. To find out more and contribute, please visit www.patreon.com/build.